Water. Earth. Fire.
Air. Wait, shoot, that's the wrong one.
Air.
Fire. No, wait.
Long ago,
the four nations lived together in harmony. Then changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Hey guys, it's me, your favorite D-tier YouTuber. Today I'm going to talk for a long time about one of my biggest obsessions of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I rewatched it about half a year ago for the new live action show, and since then I've been obsessed. I made an AMV, I talked about it on the podcast. I cannot shut up about this show. We all know it's a masterpiece, you've all seen it, but do yourself a favor and rewatch it, you won't regret it. Anyways, I've decided to put my obsession with this show into a video by ranking every single episode of it. This took forever, and I mean forever. Almost 3 to 4 months of writing and editing and actually watching the show again to get this video out. A big inspiration on a lot of points I made in this video were definitely inspired by the Over-Analyzing Avatar series, which I will link in the description. It's great, check it out. I'll obviously be ranking these episodes off my opinion. I'm probably going to say a lot of things that you're going to disagree with, and that's okay. You can have your own opinion. Actually, give me like your top 3 episodes in the description, or all of them. You can do whatever you want. Also, I will be counting a lot of the two-parters into one episode, so like Sozin's Comet will just be one segment. For some of them though, I will split them into first part and second part if I feel like they're completely different from each other. Anyways, I'm going to split this video into a tier list, C tier to S tier. Since let's be honest here, there are no bad to even mediocre episodes of the show, they're all at least good. So we're gonna start this off with the C tier episodes, which are episodes I would give a 7 out of 10. Enjoy and let's get into this. This is every single episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender ranked. And the worst episode of Avatar, more like the weakest because they're all good. And the worst episode of Avatar is... I don't know, man. A lot of people seem to like this one, but I just can't get behind how weird the characters act in this. It definitely has its highs. June is great, the necklace from Katara is important here, and Iroh is pretty great as per usual, but man, are the characters weird in this. Aang is really annoying in this one. I get that he's just a kid, but he's so obnoxious in this. I feel like we're too far into the season for Aang to do something like this, but at least it's handled in a kinda realistic way. But seriously, what is up with Katara and Sokka ditching Aang? Like, I get that they're mad at him, but this is over the fate of the entire world. They know at this point in the series about Sozin's Comet, so like, why are they doing this? It's just the absolute lowest moment in Avatar for me. It just feels so out of character, and there was absolutely no reason for them to have to learn this lesson. The final fight is great though. Oh, The Great Divide. Yeah, I know everyone hates this one because it's pure utter filler. There's basically no character growth, character development, interesting world building, or practically anything to this episode. But I still think it's pretty good. For one, the tour guide is really funny. He's absolutely the best part of the episode. For an episode with such mixed comedy, he's a real breath of fresh air. Also, the idea of the tribe stories getting mixed up is pretty cool. I love the different uses of animation in this one. It's a pretty cool idea. This is honestly a kinda decent episode comedy-wise. It's a lot better than a bunch of the other early season 1 episodes. Sadly though, of course, we got the 2 tribes who are pretty annoying in this. They aren't the worst, but aren't enjoyable and certainly aren't funny. Also, Aang is kind of just really off in this one. He goes back and forth between being angry at them to wanting food from them to having a huge ego. Like, what is with him in this? Sokka and Katara would also be annoying, but they get over the differences in like 1 minute, so it's fine. Yep, this is where it all started. The Boy in the Iceberg is the first episode of the entire show and the start to the best series ever made. What do I think about it? When rewatching the earlier episodes of the show, I gotta remember how much they introduce, since compared to the insane stuff later on, some stuff introduced here can be boring, but I gotta remember how cool these ideas are in the first place. The opening monologue is great. It's such a great way to open the show, having a slightly extended version of the intro, which perfectly explains what we need to know without overdoing it. Firebenders are bad, we follow Katara and Sokka, and the Avatar bend stuff. That's basically all we really get. The rest of the episode slowly expands on that opening monologue with Aang and Zuko and all that jazz, and that's basically all we need to know about the show from the first episode. This is technically a 2-parter episode with the Avatar Returns, and that episode really sets up what season 1 is all about, but this is still a great introduction to a lot of things. Obviously, all the characters are off in this episode. It's the first episode of the show, so obviously they're kind of like this, but it's kind of crazy that they nailed Iroh from the start. Sadly, and this applies to a lot of season 1, but it's just not very funny. There's a lot of gross out humor and other stuff, which is fine because this started mainly as a kid's show, and it's probably why some people dropped the show from the start. So yeah, it's a good introduction, just nowhere near the best compared to the rest of the show. Yep, another episode that people don't really like. What a shocker. The idea here of repressing earthbending is pretty cool, and there's the one good joke about Momo being an earthbender. But yeah, this one really doesn't do much besides kinda explaining Katara as a character, which is pretty good, I guess, just not a ton to work with. Haru is probably the worst earthbender in the whole series. Honestly, he's just so underdeveloped, and I could really care less about him getting arrested. It's still good, the prison break is pretty cool, but compare this to something like the boiling rock and it's night and day. It's still good though. The Northern Air Temple is a pretty good, solid episode of Avatar. It's paced pretty well, and it explains the story and characters in a quick and effective way. Unlike some of the other episodes below this, it never really gets that boring, and it's pretty fun. I really like Sokka and the mechanics subplot. It's a really good part of Sokka's arc throughout the show. Like, this is one of the only episodes of the show that actually focuses on Sokka. He's actually, like, doing stuff in this one. Still, though, the stuff with Aang in this episode is pretty weak. Like, his ideology and his reason behind disliking the people of the Northern Air Temple makes perfect sense, but the way he comes to the conclusion to open the door is so out of left field. Like, I really feel like Aang didn't learn anything throughout this episode, but whatever, it's still good. Avatar Day is very easily the weakest episode of Season 2 and one of the worst post-Season 1 episodes of the show. This episode feels like something you would see in Season 1. It's not very funny, and it's really not trying to be anything deeper than just a whole lot of pretty good filler for 20 minutes. This kind of feels like the show just getting a weaker episode out of the way before they can just go completely insane with the rest of Season 2. The overall idea of Avatar Day is pretty cool. I just wish it had been executed better than just a background for the story. The actual parts of Sokka and Katara investigating the murder of the town's leader is pretty fun. Sokka really steals the show during these moments. I just really wish there was more of that than the rest of the frankly very boring plot. The Rough Rhinos are very generic villains. There's nothing really special about them, and they just feel like a stand-in for what would usually be Zuko in Season 1. Speaking of Zuko, he's barely in this one, which is probably another reason why it's kinda weak. However, his mini subplot is really amazing. Seeing Zuko hit his lowest point, robbing and stealing just because he feels he deserves it, is pretty great. I just wish it had more runtime in this episode instead of just like 3 minutes. Kyoshi showing up at the end is a really cool moment. There's a reason why she's everyone's favorite avatar. Showing up to your own trial just to say that you murdered their leader is pretty awesome, honestly. Overall, this episode ain't great, but it's set up for Zuko alone, so that's gotta count for something. This is basically the second part to the first episode of the show, and I do think it's much better for setting up the rest of what the show is going to be. I like the little signs that Zuko is more than just a generic villain, with him agreeing not to hurt the water tribe if Aang comes with him. That's a pretty cool detail that he has honor and respect. The score in this one is great. It also introduces so much more to the show, like so much new airbending, firebending, and waterbending. We even get the Avatar state in this, which is a great scene, by the way, seeing Aang already use waterbending in just this one moment, which is just so cool. And in the second episode of the show, we already see how powerful Aang is. It still has the early Season 1 issues of not being that funny at all, but whatever, it's fine. Okay, I used to really like this one, but on rewatch, I'm not a big fan of the Warriors of Kyoshi Island. Suki's pretty cool, and Aang and Sokka have character arcs that really needed to happen. Well, not really Aang. He didn't really have a big ego at the start of the show, and there was no reason to make him like this, but I guess I'm glad they got it out of their system so it never happens again. Sokka stops being sexist, which is cool, and the ending with him is pretty great. Aang actually does a selfless act and saves the village from the fire, which is such a great moment too. But geez, Sokka and Aang are insufferable for most of the episode. Aang might actually be more annoying than Sokka, and he's being sexist like half the time. Still though, it's got its massive highs. I just don't personally like it that much. Yeah, besides a couple other episodes in the show, this is definitely one of the most hated episodes of Avatar. I generally think it is a little bit overhated. I mean, it's not great or anything, and it is complete trash compared to every other episode in Season 3, but it's still in general a pretty good episode. It's nice seeing refugees from the Fire Nation, and the Painted Lady in general is pretty cool. I'm convinced this episode is a leftover from Season 1 though, because Toph barely does a single thing in this entire episode. It does feel very similar to Imprisoned, but it has a really cool scene with everyone helping Katara pretending to be be the painted lady, which I really liked, so this is why it does go above Imprisoned. This episode isn't that funny, honestly. I like Sokka, he's pretty cool, the ending is pretty great with him helping Katara, but I kinda hate Doc and Shu, he's pretty annoying, not gonna lie. In general, the biggest issue I have with this episode, beside it not being funny, is the fact that there's no Zuko subplot. Really? This episode deserves 20 minutes of screen time? At least one prison scene with Zuko and Ara would totally save this episode, but whatever, it's still good. Okay, so those were all the C tier episodes of the show. Now we're going to be moving along to the B tier, the episodes that I consider to be great and would give a 8 out of 10. Starting off with... This is definitely one of the weaker Season 2 episodes. There are 5 episodes that occur before the Blind Bandit, aka the point in which Avatar becomes perfect, and besides a couple of exceptions, they are usually the weakest episodes of Season 2, and this is one of those episodes. This one is still pretty great though. The swamp is a super cool environment, stuff like the great tree that stretches the world is great, and the hallucinations that Aang, Katara, and Sokka see are all pretty cool and effective at being sad and also pretty creepy. The mini tiny Zuko subplot is also pretty fun. I don't know, this episode is pretty great, but it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag for me. Aang's plot is good. I do like how absurd and ridiculous it gets, but the comedy is a bit hit or miss. Frankly, it is more hit than miss. A lot of it is quite funny, but a lot of it also misses and feels like early Season 1 humor, which is not great. Especially at this point in the show, like, come on guys, you're better than this. Some of it also doesn't work, like the super messed up dream sequence of Aang watching everyone die. I mean, it is pretty cool out of context, but having it in this ridiculous, goofy episode is complete tonal whiplash. As per usual, the Zuko subplot really carries this episode. I really enjoy it. He's such a little dweeb, I love him. This is also the actual moment where he realized he messed up, so this is the actual conclusion to his arc. I mean, it's only fully showcased in Day of Black Sun, but no one ever really seems to talk about how his arc actually concludes here. Overall, it's pretty great, just one of the weakest episodes of Season 3. Not much to say about this one. The Spirit Road is super creative and fun, and that one scene of Iroh seeing Aang is a great moment, and one of my personal favorite scenes of Season 1. This episode is kinda just filler, very strange. They didn't air this as much as they did back in the day compared to The Great Divide, and it's kinda strange because this one is much better than that one. It's actually very funny. Everything with Sokka in this episode is great. Look how far he's come. There are some good jokes. Also, the stuff with Aang and Katara is pretty good too. I love the idea of this episode. It doesn't really have anything to do with the Avatar universe and bending, but once they get into manipulating clouds, it kinda ties it all together in a really neat bow that makes it really feel like an actual episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's super fun and I really enjoy it. Really fun episode in the 5 episode gap before the Blind Bandit. It actually makes Azula do stuff, and it also has Ty Lee and May, so yeah, it's a great one. I really love how Season 2 flows throughout its runtime. Season 1 just has one goal, to get to the Northern Water Tribe. But now that that's out of the way, Season 2 is kind of allowed to give the character several goals during the season. Their main goals for the first 3 episodes was to get to Amashu to teach Aang earthbending. But once they get there and their goals obviously change and Aang saves Bumi, he tells Aang he needs to find a different, special kind of earthbender to teach him, which then gives the gang a completely different goal until the Blind Bandit. It's super fun and refreshing and gives a completely different vibe to the show compared to Season 1. Anyways, this episode's really great. The opening with the Pentapux is pretty fun, Momo accidentally kidnapping a child is pretty peak, and Bumi's in like 2 minutes and he's pretty cool, so I had fun. Ty Lee is great and hot take, but I really like May. She's pretty fun except for the part about ditching her brother. But why would she do that? They also never really touch on how bad of a state Omashu is in. They got animal abuse here, but then they never really touch on the living conditions of being in Omashu, like ever again. The chase is basically the perfect version of this episode, so throughout the whole runtime, I just kept thinking about how I could watch that for a more focused, better paced episode, but it's still great in its own right, and the perfect pieces for what the chase would eventually perfect. Okay, this is kind of stupid. Why does this episode on Serialized have a higher average rating than The Desert? Are you guys stupid or something? Anyways, this episode's pretty great, but in my opinion, it is one of the weakest post-Blind Bandit episodes of Season 2, maybe even the weakest. It's still really fun and definitely a lot better than Season 1 filler episodes. I really like Professor Zhang. He's just a silly guy and he's pretty wholesome. The owl is kind of horrifying, but he's just kind of a chill dude that gets taken advantage of by the gang, so it makes sense that he actually gets really mad at them. Also, this is the episode where Appa gets gets taken, and that's a huge moment in Avatar. Alright, seriously, this episode does have some very big issues. Like, Aang and Sokka checking the solar eclipse machine while the library sinks is a bit weird and definitely should have been written better. Also, there's no Zuko subplot in this episode, which would probably elevate this episode a lot. Alright, here's a controversial episode, Jet. This one is shockingly great. Jet is one of my favorite side characters, and I seriously can't process why people dislike him. Like, look how cool he is. How many times does he put a new leaf in his mouth? Also, he's a non-bender too. That's such a cool little detail. They could have made this one so much, and I mean so much more generic than it ended up being. Like, I remember 3 years ago when I first watched this episode, and the first thing I thought was that Aang has a giant crush on Katara, so he's gonna be jealous of Jet, and it's gonna be really annoying, and obviously, they didn't actually do that. That would be so out of character for Aang, and I'm so glad they didn't go that route. In this episode, Aang's just great friends with Jet, which is so much fun. Sokka is the one who's actually suspicious of him, which is great. This episode also gets so messed up when Jet floods the town. You see a child's doll floating in the water, which is implying that Jet killed children, which is something I didn't expect the show to actually touch on. This was honestly one of the first signs in Avatar that this was going to be much more than just a regular kid show. In my opinion, I think The Drill is a pretty overrated episode. However, it's still pretty great and I really enjoy it. This whole episode is just really fun and creative. Sokka also gets to shine here as the true leader of the group, which I really enjoyed. There's also the start of Jet's downfall here, which I will touch on in the S tier episode since I absolutely love it. It's really funny, like the usual post-season 1 Avatar episode. I do really like this episode, but it's really not trying to say anything interesting, which is my favorite element of Avatar. And sadly, much like Return to Amashu, the chase once again just does this episode better. I really like the ending with Iroh though. King of Amashu is a pretty underrated episode in my opinion. I used to absolutely love it, but now not so much. However, I still think it's pretty great. First off, Amashu is a super cool area to be in. This is also the first introduction to earthbending in the show, and it's very cool. The score is great here, and I love Boomy so much. He's such a good character. He's probably one of my favorite earthbenders in the whole series, honestly. Besides that, this episode is just so much fun. The tests are fun to watch, and the kind of predictable twist at the end is still pretty great. It's a whole lot of fun, and I never mind revisiting it. Once again, this is one of the weakest post-Blind Bandit episodes of Avatar, but it's still really great. Like, at this point in the show, it's so good that this ends up being one of the worst. First of all, the opening scene is fantastic. It's like in my top 10 favorite action scenes in the whole series. It's so good. The music is fantastic, and it's awesome seeing Aang go crazy with earthbending, since it's near the finale of season 2. Sadly, this is where the episode absolutely peaks. I still really love the Zuko subplot. It's a pretty great continuation from Lake Laogai, and that dream sequence is another great scene. Having the two dragons being his two sides and all the symbolism during this sequence is really cool. It's also perfect foreshadowing for the finale with the two dragons actually being voiced by Iroh and Azula. The actual Earth King stuff is pretty good too, but I'm kinda mixed on it. I just don't find this episode very funny. A lot of the jokes land flat, and a lot of this episode is just so predictable. Like, of course the Dai Li would cover up Lake Laogai, and then Sokka ending the episode by saying everything is gonna work out and then it doesn't. Like, that seems awfully convenient. This is a really good episode for only being the third episode in the show. It finally starts getting into the way more mature themes that the show would eventually lean in. It's just kinda jarring, honestly. The last two episodes have been super childish, and in this one, we see the charred corpse of Aang's mentor and best friend. Like, geez, that was extreme. I actually really like Sokka in this one. He's very good. In the first two episodes, he's extremely unlikable, but kinda fun to watch. But in this one, he's so much nicer while still keeping some of his unlikable traits, and it's pretty fun to watch. One of the biggest subversions here is having a Zuko plot. You gotta remember this is the first time the show does this. The second episode sets up Zuko as an ongoing villain that will chase Team Avatar around throughout the show. But this episode completely changes that, with it having an entire Zuko subplot where you root for him to fight Zhao and win. It's a really great subversion. The ending with Iroh stopping Zhao is also amazing. It finally begins showing depth in Iroh's character and the main reason why he's obviously my favorite character in the whole show. This one is also really great. Zhao letting Zuko into the Fire Nation to follow him is a really cool moment. Like, Zhao is obviously the worst villain in the series, but this is a really cool moment that shows that he is pretty smart and a worthy obstacle to the characters. The ending of Roku going absolutely insane on the sages is also such a good moment. There are some super weird out of place moments like the Sokka is a genius joke, which still really bothers me, but everything else is still great. Also, why is this considered a part 2 to Spirit World part 1? They're kind of both completely different from each other and really are not like two-parters at all. Another very solid but very weak season 3 episode. I mean, it's pretty great, but compared to literally everything else in season 3, this kinda sucks. This is probably the only episode in the show that evolves Toph as a character though. She pretty much stays the exact same during the whole show, but this one does touch on Toph's character and why she's like how she is. I'm glad we can just get an episode of the characters chilling out and doing stupid stuff. The scamming montage is so great. I love the part where the bags stack up on Sokka. It's just perfect. Having this super fun, wholesome episode before the Puppet Master is also just so good. It definitely adds more to the Puppet Master than it adds to this episode, but I still think it adds a little bit to this episode. Like, you can feel the impending doom of Puppet Master approaching when Katara starts sweatbending. It also throws Combustion Man into the mix really well. This is just a really fun and great episode overall. This is probably one of the most beloved episodes of season 1 of Avatar, and that's probably for a good reason. Last time I watched the show, I didn't really get the hype of this episode, but again, I forgot about how much this episode introduced to the show. Like, Zuko's backstory in this episode is one of the most important factors in the entire show, and this is the starting point to the greatest redemption arc in fiction. I guess the only thing really holding this episode back from being excellent is Aang's story. It's still great, but Zuko's story outshines it in almost every regard. Alright, once again, this is a classic episode for a reason. This episode is such a great subversion for what season 1 was setting up. Showing that Aang could learn firebending at any point is such a cool moment. Like, why not? Why couldn't Aang learn it at any moment? Still though, Aang is kind of really dumb for not listening to what Roku told him, and then Roku telling Zhang Zhang to teach Aang firebending is so strange. Didn't you literally tell Aang that he has to learn the elements in order? Are you stupid or something? Anyways, Zhang Zhang and Che are both great additions to the Avatar universe. Zhang Zhang's classic fireballs are incredible as usual. It's such a cool style of firebending that never shows up again. Also, Aang's really dumb in this episode, but it's way better than Boss of the Water Tribe, where throughout the rest of the show, Aang severely regrets messing with fire and refuses to ever learn it again until right at the end. Plus, Sokka tackling Aang is such a shocking moment. Like, he seriously screwed up when this many things go wrong. Also, the final action scene is super fluid and fun. It's a great episode. Besides the finale, this is usually the fan favorite of season 1, and I can totally see it. Zuko's plot with the Blue Spirit is pure genius. Having him never use firebending and still being extremely competent is great. This is kind of the first time we see that Zuko is actually kind of strong and not just pretty pathetic. The score also goes insane in this one, especially during the archer chase scene and the prison break. Finally, the final talk with Aang and Zuko is pretty great, and it has an insane payoff by the end of the series. Plus, the final shot of Zuko is so good. It's a little bit of foreshadowing that Zuko could be redeemed in the future. Regardless, this episode is really, and I mean really good, but it's just nowhere near as good as what people hype this one up to be. Compared to most of season 1, it's excellent, but compared to most of the show, it's like a solid B tier. That's how you know this is a good show. Alright, that was the B tier. Now we're going to be going to the A tier. All of these, and yes I mean all of these episodes, are fantastic, incredible episodes. I would give them all 9 out of 10s. Yes, I know we're not even halfway through the list and I'm already here, but Avatar: The Last Airbender is the best show ever made, so don't complain. Yes, I know I've put so many episodes below this one, and this is a very strange episode to put this high compared to everything else, but goddamn, if the waterbending scroll isn't one of the most fun episodes of the show, then I don't know what is. This is probably the most underrated episode of the entire show in my opinion, and it's absolutely the best quote-unquote filler episode. The Zuko and Iroh subplot is actually peak. Like, Iroh losing the White Lotus tile is such perfect foreshadowing for the Society of the White Lotus. It's also such a funny episode. Like, who allowed Appa to just float away in the background? Where is he going? Is he okay? Who's brave enough to look into this bag? Also, the final battle is great. The pirates are so much fun in the episode, some of the best non-benders in the series. Iroh is so great in this episode too. He makes a monkey face and it's the funniest thing ever. It's incredible and a personal favorite of mine. This is the first time we ever see the Northern Water Tribe, and it's so cool. The only time we've ever seen another water tribe is the shack the Southern Water Tribe live in. So seeing this massive palace is such a cool moment, especially with how much buildup it's been getting throughout the season. A cool detail that I don't see mentioned a lot is that Iroh's 4-season song is actually used throughout several moments with Sokka and Yue, and it's an absolute banger. It's so good. Also, Pakku is pretty great. He's insanely unlikable, but that's why he's great, and Katara fighting Pakku is an incredible fight scene. The best showdown of the season, probably. Still, Pakku giving up because of Katara's necklace is pretty dumb, but it's still fantastic all around. I do agree with the complaint that there should have been one more episode in the Northern Water Tribe, but as setup for the great finale, this is pretty damn good setup, and on its own, it's a fantastic episode. The Avatar and the Fire Lord is fantastic, but it's also one of the most overrated episodes of Avatar. Sorry, not sorry. Yeah, it's amazing, but like 70% of Avatar is fantastic. This is one of the best Avatar episodes? Seriously? Alright, I really love the parallels between Aang and Zuko in this episode. Avatar does this a ton, but it's always nice to see it, and it's done especially well here with Sozin and Roku literally being both connected to Zuko and Aang. Roku and Sozin's backstory is very cool to see, and I like how it's told through the two different characters. Sozin's downfall to becoming evil is also really great, and getting to see a cracked out Avatar is also just super awesome. And of course the twist, I think just on shock value, it's incredible. Like, did anyone actually see this coming? But without the shock value, yeah, it's still good. It makes sense and explains why Zuko's the way he is, but it's nothing groundbreaking or anything. It didn't really need to exist, and it definitely wouldn't really change the show besides a few cool Easter eggs. Like, Aang being related to Zuko is really cool, but really guys, this is one of the best episodes in all of Avatar, better than Puppet Master, Tales of Ba Sing Se, Lake, Laogai, and the Firebending Masters? Alright, sure, whatever. I mean, right off the bat, this episode opens with Leaves from the Vine, so that's how you know it's going to be a good one. I absolutely love this episode. It's a filler episode, but it has some incredible moments throughout. First off, this is just a really funny episode. The hippie weed smokers are great. I love Moku, where all the characters just know him for some reason. God, it's so good. Secret Tunnel is a banger. The music in this episode is actually really good, and the Badger modes show up. Aang Katara's kiss being up for interpretation is pretty great, even though it's kind of been confirmed already, but who really cares? There's also a super awesome moment of world building where it's revealed that the origin of Amashu was from these two lovers creating a city together, which just so happens to be a retelling of the Romeo and Juliet story. I mean, this episode is better than Romeo and Juliet. Only thing that could make this episode better is if it had incest, so thanks for that, Netflix Avatar. I really appreciate it. Anyways, the best part of this episode is the Zuko and Iroh subplot. This one is fantastic. It's really funny, and it's the beginning of the Zuko character arc, which is obviously my pick for the best character arc in fiction. So yeah, of course, it's the highlight of this episode. Zuko feels so much trauma and negativity about his scar, and that he suffered and must reclaim his honor. But in this moment, he sees someone else with scars on them too. The Fire Nation has caused scars that he has also suffered from. But in the end, he still hasn't changed and decides to steal their horse in this final moment. Which is just such brilliant setup for Zuko alone, where throughout that entire episode, he's riding on the stolen horse, a mistake he severely regrets. Just absolutely brilliant. This is probably one of the creepiest episodes of Avatar, besides, I guess, the Puppet Master. After a season and a half of always being chased by the Fire Nation, the gang finally gets to a place that's protected from the Fire Nation, and it's this creepy brainwashing city that's almost or even as bad as the Fire Nation. The Zuko or Jet subplot in this episode is fantastic. I'll talk about it in detail in Lake Laogai, but Jet's fall off is just so tragic. Him turning back to his old ways is so symbolic for Zuko, since what Jet does in this episode is basically what Zuko does in the finale of season 2. The fight scenes between Jet and Zuko is fantastic. It's, in my opinion, probably in like the top 20 best Avatar fight scenes. I'm not sure why, it's just so sharp and clean and so creative. Easily the best fight in the show that doesn't use bending. I absolutely love it. Jet getting his wheat stick cut off is just so peak. The ending with Judy getting murdered and replaced with a different clone is just such an unnerving part of the show. She's obviously not killed, because the show later talks about it and how she actually survived, but it's very strongly implied that they killed her in this moment, which is just so dark and really terrifying. God, I also love the mysteries of Ba Sing Se. I love that the show never actually explains what's going on. Right off the bat, Season 3 drops an absolute banger. It's a really slow and character-focused episode, which makes sense since this is right after Crossroads of Destiny, and we definitely couldn't just get back to the standard Avatar formula after how much that episode changed the show. The Aang-Zuko parallels are very common for this show, but this is probably my favorite use of it because their stories are extremely similar to each other, with Aang refusing to go along with the plan of being invisible, and he makes irrational choices, while Zuko has to stir in the consequences of betraying everyone in Season 2. I love these parallels. Nothing goes harder than Aang saying he needs to reclaim his honor just to cut to Zuko. That's brilliant. I also love how the parallels extend past Aang when Hakoda and Katara hug, with Hakoda showing real love as a father just to cut to Ozai congratulating Zuko for killing the Avatar, but in this really sinister, non-loving way. This episode also has the Ozai face reveal, which I also love. It's an unnecessary choice to keep Ozai's face hidden, but this is the first time Zuko sees his father in the whole show, so it's a big reveal for us and Zuko. What an amazing start to the season. It is a kind of weird decision to follow up Season 3's opening depressing episode with a super fun wholesome episode, but if you ignore that, this is still again a super fun wholesome episode. This is a pretty strong filler episode. Besides progressing Katara and Aang and exploring the Fire Nation citizens more, nothing else happens, but I think these elements are enough to make it worth it. Plus, on its own, it's one of the most fun episodes of the show. Sokka is so great in this episode. He's so funny. I love him. Come on. Wang, Fire Nation birds. It's peak. Aang using 100-year-old out-of-touch slang. The whole episode is also really great. The music in this episode also is just absolutely incredible. Avatar has incredible music, but this is one of the catchiest tracks in the whole series. The entire dance party sequence in general is just so much fun. I usually forget this, but there is a Zuko subplot in this episode, and it's also really amazing. It's pretty nice having a super fun wholesome Aang plot with Zuko having a depressing dark plot. It just fits. The Mei and Zuko stuff is really horrible, but it's kind of the funniest thing ever. They're both so edgy, I can't handle it. It's too good. And of course, this is the first Zuko Iroh prison scene, which as a whole, all the prison scenes with Iroh are incredible. I mean, it's the only Iroh we get for the first half of Season 3, so obviously they're peak. Anyways, I love how these prison scenes are shot like Zuko's in a jail cell the whole time. It's been brought up a million times, but it is genius. Some of the best cinematography in the whole series. It's so good. This is probably one of, if not the only actual training episode in all of Avatar. Season 1 kinda cuts around it and Season 3 barely focuses on it at all. So this is truly the only episode actually focused primarily on Aang's training, and the fact that this is the only episode that does this kinda makes it even better because the training and ideology behind bending is absolutely fantastic. I love the fact that bending isn't just a physical ability. Aang doesn't have to become stronger to earthbend, he just needs to think and act like an earthbender. Bending comes from your mentality, not your physical capabilities. It's such a cool and unique way to showcase a magic system that I wish was done more. The new creative way Toph teaches Aang is also super cool. I love how much more extreme she is compared to Katara. Anyways, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what is easily the best part of this episode. Jesus Christ, the Zuko plot in this episode is so good. I love the idea of Zuko also training by learning a new form of firebending, that being lightning bending, and how just like earthbending, in order to master it, you need to have a certain mental strategy, which Zuko is obviously not able to do, and so Iroh teaches him lightning redirection, which will get a masterful payoff in one of the best moments of the whole series. I love this plot. I love how Zuko learning lightning redirection requires him to learn the mentality of the four nations, which parallels Aang's duty as the Avatar and needing to know all four nations' cultures and bending. Just so good. And the Zuko lightning scene is fantastic and tragic. After the upbeat ending with Aang, cutting to Zuko at his absolute lowest low is such a fantastic and sad way to end this episode. Also, Sokka got stuck in a hole or something? I don't know. Man, what a fantastic episode to open Season 2 with. I can't believe that right after Season 1's absolute highest moment, Season 2 just drops an episode that's almost on the same quality as it. It's not quite as grand or epic as the Siege of the North, but it's still incredible in almost every way. Season 2 begins the idea of almost every episode having a Zuko Iroh subplot, and this is the first episode to do that, since it's obviously the start of Season 2, and oh my god, I love this idea so much. Season 1 had this tight restriction of having Iroh and Zuko being the villains of every episode, but now that the formula has stopped, they're able to get so much more creative with them in each episode. Zuko and Iroh aren't just limited to chasing the Avatar now, they can deal with Azula and do other things. This might be a crazy hot take, and you might have never heard this before, but I think Azula is incredible and easily the best villain in Avatar. Her opening scene is practically perfect. She's just so much more powerful than anyone else in the show. She flat out destroys Zuko in their fight, showcasing how much more calculated and powerful she is compared to all the other characters in the entire show. Still, Zuko falling for Azula's trap will always bother me. Like, are you stupid? She's been like this her whole life. Wouldn't you be a little bit suspicious? God. The Aang plot is also fantastic. I'm really glad this show is able to explain and showcase the limitations of the power scale in Avatar. After seeing how insanely powerful Aang was in season 1, we get an entire episode explaining the moral and logical reasons why Aang can just go into the Avatar state again and kill the Fire Lord. I also love how the first episode of season 2 is about the Avatar states and the weaknesses of it, and then in the finale of season 2 we get that brutal gut punch that has been set up since the start of the season. Love this one, it's always been a classic. Again, I think this episode is severely underrated. I get that episodes like The Drill are more fun and enjoyable, but The Serpent's Past is so much more character focused, and honestly, I just love it. It's so realistic to have 2 entire episodes about Aang dealing with the loss of Appa, and how he eventually gets over it. Suki and Jet show up in this episode, which is really cool. I love how these 2 minor quote-unquote filler episodes from season 1 now have much more importance because of Jet and Suki coming back. Since it's not that long, I'll start with the Zuko subplot, which is pretty great. Zuko and Jet are like the perfect team up, especially with how similar their stories are. They're practically both opposites, but also the exact same. It's just such a cool pairing you would never think of. Also, I love Jet. I seriously can't understand why people hate him. He's just genuinely helping people, and it's really cool. It still really annoys me how the episode treats Jet like a bad dude with the kind of sinister music that plays whenever he's on screen, which makes no sense because from what we know, he actually only had good intentions. It's kind of shocking still that this is somehow the weakest plot of the episode. That might be the only time in season 2 where Zuko's plot is the weakest part. I love the Sokka subplot. It's short but really effective, and it's such a cool moment to show how far Sokka has come since he last saw Suki. That moon line goes so hard, and I appreciate them showing that Sokka is still hard traumatized from Yue's death. It just makes perfect sense. The Aang plot though, it's so good. I love how in the desert Aang was destructive and mad, but in this episode Aang is much more focused and concentrated to not lose control of his emotions like he did last time. It's just such incredible writing. This is how you write a character going through difficult times. And the ending with Aang and the baby is so good, oh my god, and then they hit us with the
"and how I feel about you."
It's so powerful. Dude, how do you get away with this? God, I think my second favorite arc in Avatar might actually be Sokka's. It's crazy how unlikable he was in the first episode of the show, and now he is one of the most likable characters in the show, especially in this episode. We just get a whole episode to showcase every positive thing about Sokka, from his comedy to his talents as a warrior. The monologue from Pian Dal explaining every single good thing about Sokka just feels so rewarding after watching him grow throughout the entire show. Everyone is also just so nice and supportive to Sokka in this episode. He is the butt of a lot of jokes during the show, but in this episode literally everyone supports him and the entire gang falls apart the moment he leaves for a day. They all feel like a family at this point. It's too good. Pian Dao is also great. He's so similar to Iroh, and I love how it ends with the confirmation that he actually is connected to Iroh. Speaking of Iroh, I love his subplot. He's so cool. Him outsmarting everyone and becoming buff is just so awesome. I get so excited and hyped up watching this episode. It's amazing. Best episodes of season 1, and it's not even close. However, it's still top of A tier because the rest of the show is so unironically fantastic that this just eventually becomes the usual for the show. Also, this is obviously one of the examples of counting both part 1 and part 2 into one segment, even though they aren't labeled as one on Netflix. Starting with part 1, it's very good, but it's kinda crazy how little happens in this episode. Kinda a hot take, but I really like Sokka and Yue's relationship. It is underdeveloped, but I think that's what makes Yue's sacrifice so much much more impactful. Like, they spent so little time together, but in the end, they spent enough time for it to be worth it, and damn it, that's powerful. The stuff with the prince guy is pretty good. I kind of love how a good chunk of Sokka's plot in this episode is just him arguing with this dude. That's pretty funny and very in character for Sokka. Anyways, part 2 time, and this is where stuff actually happens. Ko is great. Yeah, a real new opinion. He's so cool. I love how he's so threatening, yet is actually very, very helpful to Aang, and just generally gives him good advice. Zhao is obviously the weakest villain in Avatar, but his acts in this episode are chilling. Him killing the moon is such a powerful moment that it's still really shocking to this day. Compared to the rest of season 1, this is probably the darkest the show gets. I know it's just a fish, but damn is it powerful. This is also one of the only times in season 1 we see Iroh drop his relaxing facade and actually get angry, which, while is done better later on, is still such a powerful moment once he goes full out. The colors are insane too. One of the issues I do have is that the weight of the Battle of the North isn't really that strong. Like, all the positives that I've listed have nothing to do with the actual Siege of the North, and we barely ever see the battles, and a good chunk of it is with Sokka or Zuko or Aang in the spirit world, so we never really feel the weight of the actual Battle of the North, which should be a much bigger deal than it's treated as. Still though, Aang becoming Blue Man is such a powerful, strong moment. The score is insane, and everyone bowing to Aang is phenomenal, and the best moment of season 1 by a landslide. I honestly can't believe this is just an above average episode compared to the rest of Avatar. Okay, so I've talked several times about the moment where Avatar becomes perfect, which is of course the Blind Bandit, but this is the moment where Avatar somehow peaks again and gets even better. It really starts after Day of Black Sun, but that's later in the list. In season 2, Toph being added to the group changed the show significantly, allowing for the group dynamic to work better, but Zuko getting thrown into the group somehow makes it even better. This is my favorite version of Zuko, not counting Zuko alone. He's so silly and charming, while also keeping the same angry, aggressive traits. I love how even though he's on the good side, he's still aggressively edgy and dark. It works so well, and he works off every character in the show perfectly, even more perfectly than what Toph added to the group. This episode has one of the biggest points in the whole show, where Zuko joins the gang. I mean, it's something we all knew was gonna happen, but just seeing it happen in real time just makes it so much better. It's crazy how well written the show is at this point. Zuko fitting into the gang would obviously take time, and it's all treated so realistically. Every character has the appropriate reaction to Zuko joining. Toph not caring, Sokka going along with Aang having to take time to consider, and Katara literally hating the idea. It's all just so perfect. Also, the stuff with the Blue Spirit callback is super fantastic, and it's insane how they remember that small detail from that episode and brought it back here, this time with Zuko using it on Aang to convince him to trust him. It's also a really nice way to end off Combustion Man. I love how Sokka gets the dub on him. It's really good. Unfortunately, this episode does have some weird moments, 2 of them in fact. First of all, I don't really like Aang trying to avoid his responsibilities at the start of the episode. It makes logical sense, but right after his incredible speech at the end of Day of Black Sun, him acting like this really drives me the wrong way. I also really don't like the scene of Zuko trying to take down Combustion Man. I get what they were trying to go for, but Dante clearly was given the wrong instructions or something, because his line delivery sounds so obviously fake. It feels like he's fake beating up Combustion Man. He even loses to him. Sokka's the one who actually gets the dub on Combustion Man. This is supposed to be the big moment where Aang trusts Zuko, and it is great writing. It adds a much bigger point to Combustion Man, but they kind of fumbled the execution. But it's not the biggest deal, because the main breaking point for Aang is when Zuko says he needs to control firebending. These issues aren't the worst, they don't bother me a ton, and I can totally put them aside when the episode is so fantastic, but I just can't put it in S tier, sorry. Yeah, it's the Ember Island players, it's peak. Love this episode so much. It's practically the perfect recap episode, managing to recap the show but in a very funny, creative way. In general, this doesn't even feel like a recap episode. It's more of an episode honoring everything about the show, from the good to the great divide. They could just settle on that and it would already be great, but you have some incredible meta moments like Zutara being canon in the play and then Aang getting angry about it. Every single character just has at least 3 funny moments during this episode. They all react to this play perfectly. I love how Toph is having the time of her life, and Aang getting so mad he said he would be in the Avatar state is a really funny thought. This episode also ends off really bleak, which is really great, super unsettling foreshadowing for Sozin's Comet. This is the universally agreed moment in Avatar where it becomes peak. It's so shocking the improvement in quality past this point. This comes after Avatar Day, and then out of nowhere they drop this absolute banger episode. First off, let's talk about the fan favorite Toph. I love Toph. Everyone loves Toph. She's just the perfect character to introduce to the team. Having a blind person who just so happens to use her blindness to become one of the strongest characters in all of Avatar is just such perfect writing. All we've seen from Earthbenders so far have usually just been strong people throwing rocks, so to have a completely new look into earthbending is so cool. Everything about Toph is perfect. She's the perfect character. There's practically nothing wrong with her. This episode in general is just such a strong step up in comedy. It's kinda crazy how funny this episode is. Go back to the Fire Nation! Sokka is just casually racist, so that's cool. This episode also has earthbending villains, which is a pretty cool, unique concept. Toph deciding to fight back against her parents and absolutely destroying all the wrestlers is such a cool moment, and it's so satisfying after how much ridicule her parents give her. If anything, I guess Xin Fu isn't the best villain. He just wants money, and that's practically all he gets. I don't really care for him throughout the entire show. He's just kind of uninteresting. It's also not the deepest thing ever compared to much of Avatar. It's just a whole lot of fun. This episode is just straight up animal abuse. It's so harsh and mean and pretty heartbreaking. It's also one of the most emotional episodes of Avatar, maybe even the most emotional. The scene where Appa and Aang are having the same dream, or when Appa goes back to the old air temple where he and Aang first met, is absolutely devastating. I like how Suki gets involved, and it's just such a sad episode in general. Unfortunately, this does feature what is the worst line in Avatar.
You're not prettier than we are.
I still can't get behind how bad this line is. Kylie is such a nice, caring person the entire show. She never does anything like this ever again. I can't process why she would say this. It's also just a really, really annoying line in general, and it's delivered horribly, like a snobby brat. It's so bad. The whole Kyoshi Warriors versus Azula fight in general is also just kinda rough. I like the Azula line about how fans make fire hotter. That's pretty creative. But Mei's lines are also really corny and also pretty annoying. In general, this whole fight writing-wise is just a complete mess. It's still a fantastic episode though. This episode should be S tier. If it didn't have the Kyoshi versus Azula fight, it would definitely be S tier. It is phenomenal and it is absolutely devastating. When I first watched this, I did cry. It is brutal. But unfortunately, again, that line is just so bad, I can't put it in S tier. A lot of people seem to love this episode, and I think it's incredible, but as the first part of Crossroads of Destiny, which by the way this isn't, this episode is completely different and has a completely different tone. Anyways, while some think it's one of the best, I don't think it even comes close to the highs of Crossroads of Destiny. I love Sokka seeing his father again. It's actually a very emotional moment, but I wish it got a little more focus. It only gets one extra scene, and then it never comes back again, which really sucks. I really love the Aang subplot. Seeing his external struggles is really cool, and I appreciate we got a whole episode for this, to dissect Aang as a character. Guru Patik is pretty cool, and his similarities to Iroh is really nice. Seeing nice Zuko is extremely uncanny, but it's very sweet and tragic with the context of the next episode. But I mostly just really like seeing Iroh happy. I also just have to mention this, but I still really like Mei. Why is she wearing her makeup like that? It's so unnecessary, but it's just really funny. And Ty Lee and Mei's dynamic is just really great in general. Okay, here's probably one of my biggest hot takes of this entire video, but I really have mixed thoughts on Toph metal bending. I love Toph being able to metal bend, and it fits perfectly with the scene with Aang. All that is great, but the writing for the scene just feels kinda off. Like the two guys telling Toph that it's impossible to metal bend 2 times, it's pretty unnecessary. Why? I want at least a little bit of a surprise that she can actually metal bend, not all this pretty obvious foreshadowing. I just really thought it should have been written better. Alright, it's another controversial one, the beach. So many people love this episode, but so many people also really dislike this episode. What do I think? Well, I think you can already tell, but I absolutely love this episode. However, I do think it has some weak moments. Cannot state this enough, but I really love Zuko and Mei. They're both such emo losers. It just works so well. Azula and Ty Lee are also really great too. Azula is a little prick, and Ty Lee is just being silly the whole episode. This is basically like a better version of the headband, since both of those episodes are big reminders that the main characters are all kids. But I feel like this episode works so much better because it has much more character focused parts, and a big chunk of it is on the main villains of Avatar, which is really unique. The brief Aang subplot is also really great. The action is really incredible. It reminds me of Sozin's Comet, and if something reminds me of Sozin's Comet, then you know it's good. The stuff with Azula in this episode is also pretty epic. Besides the last 3 episodes of the show, this is the only time Azula has more depth than just being a psychopath, and it's one of my favorite elements of her character that I will touch on more later. Okay, here's the main thing I have mixed feelings on during this episode. Zuko. Like, I love you, man, but you're kind of insufferable for the first 10 minutes of this. It's not terrible or anything. It makes sense for Zuko to be super angry at literally everyone, but he's kind of just a total annoying baby, and the stuff with him and May kind of stinks. Like, I like them, but don't expect me to take it seriously when they break up just to get back together in 2 minutes. Besides that though, Zuko is pretty much perfect during this episode. After that kinda weird moment, Zuko wandering the beach alone after is so perfect for him as a character, and I love seeing him think about the time he used to spend with his dad before everything went wrong. Then we get one of the most interesting infamous scenes in Avatar, which is the campfire / breakfast club scene. It's a perfect scene explaining why every single villain in Avatar is how they are. For a pretty standard episode, at least on the standards for season 3, this elevates it a ton. Ty Lee breaking her happy persona is fantastic. I love how nothing happened to May, she was just born like this. And then of course Zuko. This is one of the best moments during his arc, embracing that it was his fault for his betrayal during season 2. At that point in the show, he had grown enough to make his own decisions, and this is him accepting that. By saying that he's angry at himself, he's saying that it's his fault. It wasn't Azula or his father who caused his decision, it was fully his choice. And I love the little moment of Azula smiling while Zuko's doing all this, because she already knew this, and then I love the little moment of her having a small moment of insecurity before quickly changing the subject. It again gets explored further in the last couple episodes of the show. This episode is really incredible on all fronts, especially for Azula and Zuko. I just feel the overall package does have its misses, but without them, this would easily be an S tier. Alright, it's S tier time. There are 13 episodes in Avatar that I would give a 10 out of 10. I am not joking when I say that. I would give all these episodes individually a 10 on a movie scale. Some of these I'm stretching a bit. If I were to be realistic, they would be a high 9, but doesn't matter. It's my list, and I feel they're the best of Avatar and some of the best episodes in all of television. You're also probably going to hear me talk about some of these episodes for way too long, and it's kind of because I think every single episode here are their own little masterpieces throughout the show. So just excuse that. It's just, I just feel very passionate about the show, and there's a lot I have to say about these episodes. So let's get into it. Alright, you know how I said the waterbending scroll was the most underrated episode of Avatar? Well, I lied. It's absolutely the desert. This is the one. While it is talked about much more than the waterbending scroll, mainly cactus juice, it's still one of the least talked about episodes in season 2, which is completely insane to me. Besides maybe the Ember Island players, this is my pick for the funniest episode of Avatar. Yes, it's because of cactus juice. How do you even write something this funny? I mean, look, it's a giant mushroom. Maybe it's friendly. Anyways, besides that, this episode in general is seriously incredible. Katara gets to fully shine here as the leader of the group. Toph can't see, Aang is out of it, Sokka is, well, completely out of it, so Katara has to take role of the leader in this episode and carry the whole team throughout this whole episode. Aang being super off character in this episode works so well. It's so cool seeing Aang drop his regular happy persona and just go fully out in this episode. He just straight up kills stuff. Aang always goes into the Avatar state when he's in danger throughout the show. The first episode of season 2 literally explains this, but in this episode when he goes into the Avatar state, he does it with the intention to hurt someone, which is a really scary thought, and then Katara stopping Aang is also just fantastic. What a sad way to end this episode off. I also love the Zuko Arrow subplot. This is the episode that finally starts exploring the White Lotus, and it's still one of the coolest mysteries of the show. And I love how it's built up throughout the 3 seasons until it's finally resolved in the finale. So good. I can't believe people don't talk about this episode more. Probably an A tier episode, but come on, it has cactus juice.
Nothing's quenchier.
It's the quenchiest. Okay, so why is the Boiling Rock an S tier? Sure, it's great, but it's not that good, is it? Nah, it really is. The Boiling Rock is one of the weakest post-Day of Black Sun episodes, but like, it's a post-Day of Black Sun episode. Everything past that point is literally perfect. The prison break aspect of these 2 episodes are really fantastic. It's also really nice to see Sokka break out of the Boiling Rock not once, but twice. He really is the best. Unfortunately, he doesn't get to fight a lot during this episode, which sucks, but he's still really incredible throughout this episode. I also really love Sokka and Zuko's relationship. I mean, Zuko Zuko says the funny line in this episode, come on. It's still one of the weakest relationships, but I just love seeing these guys get along. Like in the first episode, Sokka gets destroyed by Zuko, and now they're working together to save Sokka's father. That's just really cool. Look how far they've all come. Another really cool detail I don't see talked a lot about is the reason why Zuko helped Sokka in this episode. It isn't stated, but I think it's pretty clear why. Sokka failed during Day of Black Sun, and even though his dad doesn't care, Sokka wants to prove to his dad that he can succeed and isn't a failure, and in a sense, he's trying to get his honor back. Now, does that remind you of anyone? Anyways, my point is that Zuko helping Sokka because he can't regain his honor from his father is super cool, even if it's unintentional. It's just a really cool, unexpected way to tie these two unrelated characters together. Also, I just really like Chit saying. I love how he just joins the crew at the end of the episode. That's so good. He's also just a cool guy in general. Now it's time to talk about the best moment in this episode easily. Mai and Ty Lee betraying Azula is a seriously unexpected moment. I can see Mai betraying Azula, it makes sense, but then Ty Lee also betraying Azula? Jesus Christ, it's fantastic. I love the little confused look Ty Lee has when she's doing it, like even she didn't expect that. This is the start to the downfall of Azula because in this moment, for the first time in the whole series, she miscalculated, which is a great moment. It's awesome seeing this other afraid, miscalculated version of Azula, who somehow managed to screw up. I also love how this is Mai and in a way Ty Lee getting back at Azula, because there's a lot of looks Mai gives Azula throughout the show, plus Ty Lee was literally forced to join her. So this twist not only makes sense, but was foreshadowed since season 2. God, this episode is so good. Oh yeah, and Suki's there. She's cool, I don't know what to say. This episode, one of the absolute best of season 2, and I wish it was talked about more. This is like City of Walls and Secrets on steroids. This episode is kinda terrifying and the second most disturbing episode of the show, cause again, Puppet Master exists. But this episode is just super unnerving and creepy. I just love how the mysteries of Ba Sing Se are never explained. The hundreds of brainwashed Judies in the basement is still so weird. Why are there so many of them? How are they getting these people? I guess we'll just never know. I love how this episode uses Toph's ability to tell someone's lying and how it gets brung up several times during this episode just to hit you with one of the most brutal moments in the show when Jet is killed and she says he's okay just for Toph to tell Sokka that he's lying. I do think a couple lines here are a little bit weird and Jet snapping back out of his trance is kind of strange, but in general, Jet's death is an incredible moment. Jet's downfall is just so sad. He had all the pieces to move on from the horrible things he did and live a new life, but he just had to go after the firebenders, and as a result, he was brainwashed and trapped in a mental prison, but in these final moments of his life, he decides to fight back and do the right thing. It's an incredibly sad moment to end the character off, and it also parallels perfectly with Zuko, who is also coming to the moment where he breaks free from the brainwashing that his father gave him and does the right thing. Zuko finally ditching his blue spirit persona is such a great moment. I love it. And then of course, Iroh's speech. Iroh finally breaks and gives Zuko his full thoughts, which gets me every time. He finally just tells Zuko his full thoughts on his situation, and Zuko finally breaks, which will be concluded perfectly by Crossroads of Destiny. As I said in the Blind Bandit segment, the jump in quality for the show is so impressive. I mean, season 2 from the start is a step up from season 1, but seriously, past the Blind Bandit, the show just becomes so incredible. Nothing in season 1, no matter how grand, even gets close to this episode, which is just pretty simple and small in scale. It's pretty much just a perfect 20 minutes of character growth, action, incredible scenes, and every character at their absolute A game. The dynamic change of Toph being added to Team Avatar is just so perfect. Her constant fighting with Katara throughout the whole episode is not only funny, but super in character for both of them. I love how Sokka kinda just sits around the whole episode while everyone else is constantly fighting. Everyone in the gang just works around with Toph so well. The Sokka gag, Aang defending his boy Appa, and of course Katara, as I mentioned already. And if you thought that dynamic was perfect, we get one of my favorite pairs in all of Avatar, being Iroh and Toph, two of the best characters that practically work perfectly off each other. This scene is maybe in my top 10 favorite Avatar scenes. It's so perfect, it's funny, it's heartwarming, it's just so sweet seeing the brash kid and the old wise guy have this extremely peaceful conversation. Out of all the things to make Toph actually change her mind on something, it's Iroh. It's pretty nice to see Iroh actually help people, since so far in season 2 he kinda just dicks around. Anyways, I've compared episodes like Return to Amashu and The Drill to this episode because in my opinion this is the best of Mai, Ty Lee, and Azula as a unit in the whole show. The Crossroads of Destiny is better, but Mai and Ty Lee don't do much in those episodes, and they don't do nearly as much in season 3, so in my opinion this is the best them as a team ever gets in the show. In season 1, Zuko is always chasing Team Avatar, but he kinda does it poorly and they're usually able to get away from him. But Azula is such a step up. She's able to tire out the entire team and chase them 24/7 the entire episode, while slowly tiring them out and eventually cornering Aang by the end, which is brilliant writing. The fight between Mai, Ty Lee, Katara, and Sokka is so good. Sokka actually gets the shine here since both Ty Lee and Mai are non-benders. He gets to fight them, and once Katara is kinda helpless against Ty Lee, Sokka has to fight for himself, which is a really cool moment. Then of course the climax where literally everyone, Iroh, Toph, the gang, Zuko, they all show up and without saying a word all gang up on Azula. It's just too good. And the fact that despite all this, she's able to get the upper hand on them, absolutely brilliant. I love Azula. She's seriously one of, if not my favorite villain in anything ever. Peak. It's peak. Without a doubt, the darkest episode of Avatar, and it isn't even close. There's a lot of elements of the show that are dark or disturbing, and I love these moments. It's really impressive for them to have these moments in a kid's show. Like, I mean, all of Avatar is on a 100-year-old war, so in general, it's dark from the start. Anyways, if you thought it was impressive for a kid's show to get away with that, then it's seriously insane that they were able to get away with something on the level of the Puppet Master. They show veins, blood, kidnapping, torture camps. How do you get away with this? It's crazy that this was for Halloween, and instead of making a silly spooky time like a normal kid show, Avatar decided to literally make straight up horror and tell a deeply dark tale of how victims hurt other victims and the endless cycle of it. This episode in general is just complete tonal whiplash. The tone and style of this episode flip-flop constantly. Like, with the context of this being a kid's show and this being your first watch, you would absolutely expect them to just psych you out and have a happy conclusion, and once that's dropped and Hama goes full evil, you would expect that, well, I mean, Katara's gonna beat her up, with it being kinda sad since that's her only mentor and she betrayed her, but it would overall be a bittersweet ending. But no. Katara beats Hama, but by doing so, she uses her own methods against her, and by doing this, Hama wins. And the episode literally ends with Hama laughing and Katara crying because she just became everything she fought against. How do you get away with this? The battle against Hama in general is sick too, but it's a really sad fight because throughout it, Katara uses Hama's teachings on her, which is strong foreshadowing for her bloodbending. It's easily the best waterbending duel in the series, leagues above the waterbending master fight. I just forgot about how creepy bloodbending is in general. Like, Hama bends people like puppets on strings, and one of the creepiest details about this episode is the fact that the puppets she has in her closet are the actual people she kidnaps. The people of this Fire Nation village are her prisoners, just like how she was treated in the prisons. A brilliant, dark, twisted episode that was somehow created by a Nickelodeon show. I still can't believe this was even made. This is basically the sequel to The Puppet Master, but instead of using its dark themes to make a horror episode, Avatar decides to make an actual, really complicated, deep episode. And of course it's fantastic, it's an S tier. This episode is so incredible on every single level. While Puppet Master is more impressive just for existing, this episode manages to be super dark, but in a complicated, more interesting way. This of course applies to all post-Day of Black Sun episodes, but Zuko works so well with Katara in this episode. This is the edgiest he gets. He's so silly in this episode. I mean, that little look he gives to Katara when she's bloodbending is so good. We even get a mini battle of Zuko and Azula at the start, which is a beautiful fight scene, which is kinda crazy since it's significantly worse compared to the Sozin's Comet fight. This is also the point in the show where everyone is getting along with Zuko, and I love it. That one campfire scene is so good. Anyways, besides Zuko, the main highlight here is definitely Katara. So glad we got an extension of the Puppet Master, showing how she's slowly becoming Hama during this episode. Once she finds out who killed her mother, she goes full out, using every single measure of violence she can to figure out who did it and who to kill. You know she can't kill Yang Rong because it's a kid show, but the way they step around it is done so well. Katara doesn't forgive him. She obviously can't. He killed her mother. But she won't take his life, which is frankly significantly worse for him. Yang Ra is currently living a horrible life with no meaning. Katara killing him would be a favor, but instead she decides to leave him to stir in the consequences of his actions. And Zuko is there the whole time. This could have happened to him if he didn't stand up to his father. It's so good. We also get to see Katara's mom's death in this episode, which I love. I love how we get to see the three different perspectives on it. Sokka, Katara, and then Yang Ra. It's crazy that Katara actually walked in on her mother's charred corpse. That is messed up on so many levels, and it makes sense why she's so hard traumatized about her mother's death throughout the show. Plus, as an extra bonus, it's what happened to Aang in the Southern Air Temple. The waterbending in this episode is also just top notch. She's using a lot of Hama's tactics during this episode, and it allows for some truly mesmerizing sequences, like the scene with the icicles or bloodbending coming back. This is probably why waterbending is my favorite type of bending in the show. It's just so pretty. And just to top it all off, we get that final line of Zuko asking Aang what he's gonna do against against Fire Lord Ozai. You can just feel the impending doom of Sozin's Comet and what Aang is even gonna do against Ozai. Sometimes I just think about how fantastic this show is. Like, what? This is only in the top 10 episodes of Avatar, and it's this good? I feel like most lists and most of my videos only have truly incredible stuff and stuff I'm really passionate about in the top 3, but literally all of Avatar is incredible. I don't know, this episode just makes me think about that. Anyways, I love Day of Black Sun. I mean, who doesn't? This episode brings practically everyone in the show back and makes all the filler episodes in Avatar much more important to the story. Except for the Great Divide, I guess that doesn't count. Even my favorite character, Bata, gets to show up for 4 seconds. Incredible! Anyways, one of my favorite elements of this episode is how it subverts your expectations. You know going in they aren't gonna win. I mean, there's only 6 episodes left. What, are they gonna be about the new world? Of course not, they're gonna lose. Going in, you just expect a disappointing Infinity War-esque type of episode, but no. This episode is somehow one of the most uplifting, motivating episodes in the entire show. Sure, Aang and the gang lose, but they decide it's better to surrender and fight for another day. And then Aang gets up with tears in his eyes, thanking everyone for coming and that he's gonna make it up to them. Plus, Zuko, after 3 seasons, finally pieces together his mistake, stands up against his father, and sets out to join the gang. Is that what you call a downer ending? No, it's beautiful. There are just so many awesome payoffs here, like Azula knowing about the invasion, Sokka getting to become a true leader, Bato coming back, my boy Bato from my favorite episode. It also features what is one of the best scenes in all of Avatar, which is Zuko lightning redirecting. But as a whole, Zuko throughout this entire episode is basically perfect. I love the moment where he looks at the picture of his mother because it's him reflecting on the mistake from Zuko alone, which is one of the most satisfying, coolest moments in the entire show. He finally understands the mistake he made in that episode. He understands the betrayal on Crossroads, Iroh being his true father, and the lies and propaganda of the Fire Nation. It's all shown perfectly in his speech to Ozai, and he doesn't even kill him. He could, Zuko could totally kill Ozai, but he chooses to leave him alive so that Aang can kill him, as it's his destiny, not Zuko's. Zuko finally understands that his destiny is to teach Aang firebending, not to hunt him. If I had any complaints, I guess the action isn't the best. It's pretty good, but like compare this to Sozin's Comet and it's totally outshined. Besides that, it's a practically perfect episode. To put it simple, this episode is masterful. This is my favorite Zuko field trip episode for a reason. Right after the Western Air Temple, Avatar showcases some of its strongest and best elements all into one episode, being this one. First of all, it's just so satisfying seeing Zuko and Aang hang out. They both work so well with each other, they're best buds, I love it. This episode is also top tier comedy. Sokka showing up out of nowhere just to make horrible jokes then leave is too good. Plus the Sun Warrior Chief is perfect whenever he's on screen. Overall, this is a fantastic episode from start to finish, and I haven't even begun talking about the big one. One of the most iconic scenes in all of Avatar, which is the dragon dance scene. At this point in the show, Zuko's arc is over, but this is the final moment in his redemption. Once the 2 dragons shoot them with fire, they showcase the true meaning of firebending. Later on, the creators have said that the dragons gave Aang and Zuko visions of firebending, but I personally love the other interpretations of this magical scene. Throughout the show, besides Azula, fire is only straight red and is only shown along death and destruction. But in this moment, for the first time in the show, the dragons showcase what fire really is. Fire is creation and fire is life. The dragons show this through the mix and flow of beautiful colors, and while Aang and Zuko stare at it, Zuko finally gets it. He understands the true meaning of fire, not destruction, but life and creation. Past this point in the show, Zuko never draws fire from his anger, but the fire inside of him, his life. I just can't. It's beautiful. Oh my god. I mean, it's Tales of Ba Sing Se. Any ranking of Avatar that doesn't put this in S tier can't be trusted. Still, I do think some tales in this episode are obviously much weaker than other tales, so the quality of this episode is very inconsistent, though the absolute lowest moments in this episode are still really, really good. Tale of Aang is good, Tale of Momo is actually really fun, Toph and Katara's tale is pretty fantastic, seeing them finally get along is really nice, Tale of Sokka is absolute peak, comedy gold, Tale of Zuko is also super cute, and I think it's fantastic. It's a bit like Zuko Alone in a way, but much shorter, so it doesn't have nearly as big of an impact, but he's still really silly in this, so I really like that. These segments as a whole are just really entertaining and funny and work super well to make a really cute episode, but then obviously, you know, there's the big one. This entire episode could literally suck and it wouldn't matter because of Tale of Iroh. If anything, having this tale only be the second in line is a bit strange since it kind of just leaves me completely destroyed for the rest of the episode. Still though, it is without a doubt the absolute best moment in all of Avatar. No contest. You already know why. I cry every every time I watch this segment. It's one of my favorite moments in all media ever. Heartbreaking, devastating, perfect. Iroh helps everyone he encounters just to end the episode knowing he could never help his son. And then the final moments of this episode being in honor of Mako, Iroh's voice actor, who had passed away after season 2 was finished. One of the best ways to ever honor someone's passing, showing everything perfect with Iroh, his humor, his kindness, and deep-rooted tragedy. While a lot of episodes are better consistently, this is without a doubt the best moment in all of Avatar. Just brilliant. I've never really gotten all the praise towards Empire Strikes Back. Frankly, I haven't seen it in a while, but all the praise towards that movie kinda reminds me of the exact way I feel about Crossroads of Destiny. This is an absolutely devastating way to end off Season 2, an incredible low point in the series that Season 3 eventually will conclude. I can't imagine being part of the fandom during this episode. It somehow manages to be so unpredictable from start to finish. I mean, did you really go into this episode expecting Aang to die? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The Crossroads of Destiny is easily one of the best episodes of Avatar. Easily. It's one of the most electric and intense episodes of the show. This episode kinda has lower stakes than the season 1 finale, but it manages to be so, and I mean so much more intense from start to finish. There's a lot going on here, and not a lot of it is really set up from the guru. Most of this episode works completely on its own. Azula just owning the entire Dai Li is super great. Having these villains throughout half of season 2 just completely give up the moment Azula shows up is so cool. She seriously is the scariest character in Avatar if you didn't catch on by now. I feel like it's perfectly shown in the scene with Long Feng where Azula says he wasn't even a player because, she's right. Azula is genuinely so much smarter, more calculated, and more talented than Long Feng ever was in the entire show. Iroh having to split off from Zuko to join the gang just brings me so much joy. Iroh fits perfectly with the gang, and Toph knowing and trusting him because of the chase is such a perfect callback. Iroh doesn't interact with the gang much during the show. We never see Katara or Sokka, and at this point Aang, ever talk to Iroh that much. However, we do get a personal favorite scene of mine where Iroh and Aang discuss Aang giving up the Avatar state to not lose Katara. I mean, basically any scene with Iroh in the series is peak, but they do something really cool in this moment by comparing Iroh and Guru Patik together. Two both very wise old individuals. I love how Guru Patik tells Aang he can't have otherworldly attachments, while Iroh tells Aang he did the right thing by trusting those he loves. Then Iroh proceeds to do that insane metaphor with the tunnel, which is just such a classic Iroh thing to do. I love his metaphors, and this is one of his best. Anyways, let's talk about Zuko for a bit. Zutara Nation unite, this is the big moment. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Zutara, but you guys can do whatever. I can totally see where this show could have gone with the Katara Zuko Scar scene, and I do hope the live action show goes in this direction and actually ends up with them together in the end. But anyways, yeah, this scene is pretty much perfect. Again, taking two characters you don't really see any connection between, and then dropping the connection that both of their mothers were taken by the Fire Nation. Then it gets interrupted by Aang and Iroh, and then absolutely ruined by Azula. It's just crazy how good Azula is. She can just show up and completely suck the joy out of any scene in the show. This nice moment between Zuko and his uncle is instantly ruined by Azula. This is gonna end up sounding repetitive at this point, but we once again get one of my favorite scenes in the show, when Azula and Iroh both give Zuko his destiny. Love this scene so much. Not only is there some incredible symbolism with the two sides of Zuko fighting, being his burned and unburned side on his face, but this is also foreshadowed in the Earth King with the two dragons telling Zuko information, and the Azula dragon telling Zuko to stay while the Iroh dragon yells at Zuko to leave. Those two dragons are now telling Zuko his two options for his destiny. For pretty much everyone, and me included, I felt so much hype when Zuko broke out and aimed at Azula, just for absolute devastation to set in once he shot at Aang. One of the most devastating moments in the show, just this absolute tragic moment. Zuko has had at least 10 episodes: Blue Spirit, Cave of Two Lovers, Zuko Alone, Bitter Work, Tales of Ba Sing Se, Lake Laogai, The Earth King, and The Guru. He's had all these episodes to see the horrors of the Fire Nation and grow as a person. He's learned, he's progressed, and yet despite it all, he goes right back on a rational thought. This is perfectly shown when Katara tells him that she thought he had changed, just for him to respond with a,
I have changed.
Because, he has grown. He's grown so much, yet somehow just not enough. This decision is so devastating that almost half of season 3 primarily focuses on Zuko coming to terms with his mistakes. It might seem out of character, but it clearly isn't, since by the end of this episode, he seems so upset with himself, and Azula just tells him a twisted version of the truth by saying that he reclaimed his own destiny. Zuko has reclaimed a destiny, but the absolute wrong one, and he will face severe consequences for it. And that isn't even the lowest low of the episode. Aang dies after giving up on Katara, which by the way is also heartbreaking. He goes into the Avatar state in a very similar fashion to season 1, and right before he's about to wreck everyone, Azula just flat out murders him. This left my jaw on the floor when I first saw it. You just killed the main character? The first episode of season 2 is all about the Avatar state and the dangers of it, and then the last episode brings it back full circle in this really messed up way. I mean, of course he's alive, but it doesn't feel cheap. The Spirit Oasis water was set up in the first episode of season 2, and was even called back here with Zuko and Katara. What a bleak way to end off this episode. Zuko is back on the bad side, all of the Earth Kingdom has been taken over, and Aang is dead. I admit that it's a bit unfair to compare a 20 to 40 minute episode to an hour-long movie, but screw it, it's Sozin's Comet time. There's a lot, and I mean a lot, to talk about Sozin's Comet, but I'll try to limit my thoughts as much as possible. Sozin's Comet is a near-perfect series finale by showcasing a beautiful movie of every single character getting to do something to cap off their progression throughout the show. Not only is the action at its best, but every single character has at least one or two incredible moments to shine. Toph showcases her trust in others, Sokka showcases his leadership skills by directing Suki and Toph during their battle against the airships. Note that the two people he's leading are women. Sokka was so sexist in the first episode, and now he's trusting and supporting two female warriors. Perfect character arc. A fully realized Katara fights for what's right and defeats Azula. Aang gets the fight for what he believes is right and takes out Ozai by creating a new bending in order not to kill him. Iroh takes over Ba Sing Se not as a conqueror but as a savior for the oppressed people under the Fire Nation. On an unrelated note, I love how little Iroh changes from the show. In the first episode, he was playing Pai Sho in a ship, and by the end of the show, Iroh just has a tea shop in Ba Sing Se, and once again he's just playing Pai Sho. Plus we get to see Iroh at his most powerful, which is insane. Do you see this? How is he doing this? Zuko is perfect as per usual. His reunion scene with Iroh always makes me cry, and his fight with Azula is perfect, but I'll talk about that more later. Avatar as a whole is about growth. Every single character gets to evolve and change throughout the show. I mean, the first episode is called The Boy in the Iceberg, which is about a confused child coming out of a 100-year-old iceberg, and we end the show on Avatar Aang, a fully realized, extremely powerful avatar who restores balance to the world. Okay, this is gonna be heavy, but it's time I talk about Azula's downfall. It's straight up perfect. The betrayal from Boiling Rock is still hurting her, and I love to see a paranoid, non-calculated Azula. I've said this many times, but throughout the entire show, Azula is ahead of everyone. She knows practically everything every character is going to say or do. Whenever she shows up, the show halts and every other antagonist is instantly squished by her presence. But in this episode, we get to see an uncalculated Azula who is constantly slipping up. It's so sad because Azula has the same blood as Zuko. There's a different universe where she could have gone down the right path, but Ozai's manipulation causes her to go down a dark path, and in the end, she loses to her frankly much less powerful brother. The Zuko-Azula fight is breathtaking and beautiful to look at, but at the same time, it's also so sad because Ozai causes two children to fight and kill each other. Both of them are battling to the death for a throne that Ozai has already left. Once Azula loses, she just breaks down and starts crying chained. This once calculated Azula has fallen. After that, we never see her again. This is her last scene. No chance of redemption, forever lost in her own mind, is what I would say if the comics didn't ruin her, but let's not talk about that. On to the Aang versus Ozai fight. I love this fight. This is the best action gets in the show. It's just structured so well and looks beautiful from start to end. Most of all, I just want to talk about my one issue with this episode. And no, it isn't the Lion Turtles. I actually really love these guys. The Lion Turtles are just these godlike creatures that are beyond the Avatar in the world, and it's so cool. I feel Aang has grown enough throughout the show to know what to do against Ozai, and the Lion Turtles are just the final decision for him. What I do have an issue with is how Aang gets into the Avatar state. He just hits a rock and just goes into the Avatar state. I don't know about you, but this kind of comes out of nowhere. This massive moment from season 2 should have gotten a lot more focus than just Aang hits a rock and goes into the Avatar state. And with that out of the way, the ending couldn't be more perfect. I love seeing all these characters get along, and then Aang and Katara kissing as the music swells. It's so beautiful. Having the Avatar theme over the credits music is just that final tip of the hat that ends this series off perfectly. What an episode. But there is another episode that you're all familiar with that I like a little bit more. Zuko alone. is the best episode of Avatar. Yes, I know this is a generic take, but let's be honest here. No other episode in the show ever gets close to how many layers this episode has. Zuko is objectively the best character in the show, and as his character evolves throughout the show, he never gets close to how complex and well written he is in this episode. This has some of the lowest stakes in the show. Zuko is kinda extremely powerful, nothing here is really a threat to him, but it still manages to be extremely intense throughout its runtime. After Blind Bandit, a fast-paced, fantastic, fun episode, the show proceeds to drop a deeply depressing, slow episode of the main villain of the show going through a western and just kind of working and living with a family. This whole episode being in a western setting is without a doubt the coolest thing this show has ever done. It takes a lot of tropes from western films, but not to parody it. It kind of does it in a way to respect those themes and make its own tale off the standard western story. You could absolutely watch this episode without seeing any other episodes in Avatar. It definitely wouldn't be as good, but it would still be fantastic completely separated from the rest of the show. This is just a short tale of a confused young teenager traveling all alone while befriending a family and eventually betraying them by the end. I plan on doing a separate video all on this episode because there is just so much to discuss here. I could go on for at least half of this video's runtime just talking about this episode. From the start, the opening jingle is a different version of the Fire Nation theme. Throughout the show, the Fire Nation theme is used as an intense, scary theme, but in this moment, it's done in a sad, lonely tone, perfectly showcasing Zuko in this episode. He's the Fire Prince, the son of Avatar Hitler, and yet he's fully alone. He has no one. Iroh's gone and he's completely broken. He's lost everything he once had, and his supposed mistake of doing the right thing still haunts him. I love how there's no Aang, or in fact, any non-Fire Nation character in this entire episode. No one in this village cares about the Avatar. They're just trying to survive on what they already have. There's no wasted time in this episode. Every second, every single shot of this episode is trying to say something. Let's just take the nighttime scene of Lee and Zuko for an example. Okay, so the scene starts with Lee swinging Zuko's swords, the same sword that Zuko wields whenever he goes into the Blue Spirit persona. Lee is kinda like Zuko but at a younger age, or at least from Zuko's perspective, since this is the exact same thing that Zuko does in a flashback at a young age when he's swinging around the knife that Iroh gives him. Once Zuko interrupts Lee, he quickly feels bad and gives him Zuko's swords back, but Zuko then proceeds to give the swords back and instruct him. Zuko ironically gives a metaphor for himself when describing the blades, saying that they're two halves of the same whole. Zuko has two sides, his good and bad side, or Sozin and Roku's side. Both of these sides are in the end just Zuko. Zuko isn't his father, he isn't his uncle, he's his own person. He has the right to choose what destiny or path he'll go down, which he of course ends up choosing in Crossroads of Destiny. This is all in 1 minute of this 20-minute episode. You can kinda see how I can't talk about every single thing about this episode, but I do want to talk about the second best scene in all of Avatar for me. One that I don't think is talked about enough, and of course, it's the ending to Zuko alone. So throughout this episode, we spend most of it with Zuko spending a lot of time with this Earth Kingdom family while he reflects on his past. Azula, Iroh, and most importantly, his mother. During the main story, once Zuko leaves, Lee's mother finds Zuko and tells him that Lee fought back against the Earth Kingdom soldiers, who, by the way, are not very good people. He goes to confront them, and then we get an incredible action scene with almost no bending, where Zuko is just fighting the Earth Kingdom soldiers and just wrecking them all. As the general starts to beat him, Zuko gets knocked down, and we get a flashback to what Zuko's mother told him before she died. She tells Zuko that no matter what, he must be himself and to never forget who he is. In this moment, what she means was that Zuko is a good person. He has the right to be himself, and despite all the horrible people in his family, obviously excluding Iroh, he must remain himself, a good person. He can't become his father, he needs to become his own person, like his mother. But in this moment, when the Earth General knocks him down, he completely misses the point of his mother's speech and embraces the other side of himself, the Fire Prince, heir to the throne and son of Fire Lord Ozai. The villains of this episode immediately back off and run in fear, which would normally feel super satisfying since they're complete pricks the whole episode, but it is genuinely a tragic moment because you realize that the true villain in this moment is Zuko. From the town's perspective, Zuko is a part of a much bigger problem, which is the Fire Nation. He's the true evil who has killed their families in the war. Everything that the Earth Kingdom soldiers have done during this episode are nowhere near as bad as the true evils that the Fire Nation has committed, and Zuko in this moment is holding himself responsible for all of those evils. Zuko rides off from the town into the sunset completely alone, just like the start, and then it just ends. No happy note, absolutely nothing. Zuko once again learns nothing, but unlike something like Cave of Two Lovers, he absolutely knows what he did was wrong. Past this point in the show, Zuko never says something along the lines of embracing his identity as son of the Fire Lord. There's a scene with Jet later on when he says he's learned that being alone is not always a good idea. This episode has impacted him severely, even if he chooses not to show it. This is without a doubt the most impactful episode in all of Avatar. If this episode did not exist, then Zuko's arc wouldn't work. There, I said it. I feel like this episode is what really makes Zuko think and change. I would not buy his decision in Lake Laogai or sudden change in Earth King if this episode didn't exist. I would not buy him standing against Ozai and Day of Black Sun if it wasn't for Zuko alone. Yep, so that was my Avatar ranking. The tier list is on screen right now. This was pretty fun to make, but also absolutely exhausting to edit and write if you couldn't tell. This might be the most positive I'm ever gonna get in a video. I seriously just needed to make a video on something I've been obsessed with for over half a year now. There's a very high chance I'll do a core ranking down the road, so tell me if you would want that. I'm working on some other new stuff down the road, so yeah, make sure to subscribe please. This took forever, and thanks for watching, and this is an epic outro.
Dear Father and Azula, do you even care about my heart? Do you care about me or my great character arc?